Hey, all you Goya bean people out there.
That's us.
Those great Goya beans you love.
That's them.
I hate to tell you this. They're good for you.
Good for us.
They're high potassium.
Like bananas.
They're high fiber.
Like bran.
They're high protein.
Oh, like meat.
High protein but no cholesterol. None.
Good for Goya.
Now, if everybody had a can of Goya beans in the house, they could all start that healthy eating right now. Goya. Oh, Goya.
I think that we would have a fabulous time together. You, me, us. What do you think?
Why have you been following me?
What the fuck is the big picture? I don't know what the fuck the big picture is. One of these days, when Harry thinks I'm ready, he's gonna tell me.
All right, guys. So let me see how. This is my first time doing a moderating with more than one person. This is very cool. This will work out perfectly. I typed up a couple of guideline questions, but you guys are just gonna run with it. You guys gonna, so I will be.
Yeah, we'll run with it, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
we've done this before. Yeah.
All right, good. So this all started, Amos, just so you're aware, I had brought this up to Roberta years ago when I first met her, maybe pretty early on. No, actually it was a night I was watching a movie, and at the end of the movie, I saw your name, Roberta. I was like, what the hell? And I called you in the night and I said, you produced this movie, Alphabet City? And
she's a producer. What, are you kidding me?
I couldn't
She's
believe
like the
it.
#1 producer.
I couldn't believe it. So I called her and I was like, listen, Roberta, you're all knee deep into the experimental niche, and we got
she's shoulder deep. Shoulder deep.
Yes, she's shoulder deep. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I told you, Amos, when I spoke with you, that this was a staple of my youth. It was a movie when I worked in a video club called Video Update. This was right up there with Angel and Death Wish 2 and Vice Squad. It was
That's what we were.
classic.
That's what we were aiming for. That's
Yes,
what we
it
were.
was right there, man. And the cover was
That's it.
great. So so let's start with that's how I met your film. Let's start with how did you guys meet for this movie to happen?
Oh man, you don't want to even go back that far, but you have to go back to the 60s. Roberta and Graham Weinbrand, who was the editor of the film, were staples of State University of New York at Buffalo. They were like this couple, you know, he was like 7'11", and she was like, 5'11", something like that. And and I say, wow, look at that couple. They're the cutest couple in the world. And then I got to meet them. And they were like, I think, I don't know, like philosophy or political science or some, very heady, very smart.
Philosophy.
Yeah. And that's how we met. And, I don't know if we ever talked movies in Buffalo. Did we ever do that? Were you
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think
It was more about drugs. I mean,
drugs and politics, and then we somehow somehow we stayed in touch, I think, on some level.
On and off. Well, they called Buffalo the Berkeley of the East. So it was a very cool place to be at the time.
It was very, very left, very, very.
And then we kind of stayed in and out of it. Yeah.
But Amos, what were you studying? They were into philosophy. What were you studying?
I was studying just drugs and film on my own. I was making Super 8 films.
Okay.
I was not in school. I dropped out of school like 6 weeks after I got there, basically. But it was a great place to be because rent was super low. You basically didn't have to have a job. Even though like I worked like in the there was an art house there, and I worked in that for a little bit, called Circle Art, and it was a repertory place. So my film education was going to see movies and reading books about movies and making Super 8 movies, and I did that for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. I got there like in the fall of 68 and I left in the spring of 72. And then I got to New York in the fall of 72. And the first place I went to was the Millennium.
Wow.
So the Millennium for me was like, where every Friday night there would be open screenings. Howard Guttenplan was the guy, he'd bring figs and nuts and, like squirrel food. And, he was like this, he was like, the George Washington of the Millennium. He ran the place. And I lived a few blocks away, so I would bring these little films, and I met all these experimental filmmakers and stuff. And I eventually got into like, more the music part of New York, like the punk music of that period, CBGBs and all that. I made some films there. And, but my thing was experimental film, but also narrative, like a story. And that didn't sit so well with some people at the Millennium, but Howard cut me a lot of slack, and then, one time I brought Godard there, and Howard was like really kind of like, wow, Godard at the Millennium. And then in the early 80s, I think, like after I got off drugs and everything, and I was talking to Roberta about, hey, making a movie. And I had been talking to this English producer who produced a bunch of Warhol films and Polanski movies, named Andrew Brownsburg. And the thing about Andrew Brownsberg and he would give me a script and I would hate it. And then I would give him a script and he would hate it. And this went on for like months. Like we would meet every week. And he was desperate to make a movie in New York because he had sort of burnt his whole LA connection thing. And then one day, Roberta said to me, how's this English guy going? How's it going with this English guy? And I said, oh man, never gonna happen. Nothing's gonna happen. You know what he said to me today at lunch? He said, I think I have a title for a movie. It's called Alphabet City. And I said, yeah, okay, it's a good title, but like, what's the story? He goes, oh, I don't know. So I said that to Roberta, and Roberta said, hey, I just read a treatment called Alphabet City by this guy named Gregory Heller. And and I said to Roberta, is it good? And she said, yeah, I think it's got some possibility. So I got it from Roberta. I read it. I thought, yeah, it's got some juice here. It was interesting. But the thing was, I couldn't say that to Andrew. Because if I said it was interesting, he was going to hate it. So I gave it to Andrew. Andrew said, do you like this? I said, listen, I'm not going to tell you what I think about it, all right? Why don't you read it and then we'll talk on the phone. So I came back downtown from meeting with him, giving him the treatment. As soon as I got in my house, boom, the phone rings. Andrew says, oh, I read it. I like it. I went, holy shit. He goes, why, do you like it? I go, yeah. And there was silence on the phone for like 5 minutes because we had never seen eye to eye on any story, any idea, any, And Andrew had this way of saying, oh, this is a disaster. And so then he said, okay, I can get the money to pay this guy, Gregory Heller, to write a script. And that's how it all started.
Wow. And the script was pretty much a feature length. It was over about 95 pages and whatnot.
Well, what happened was Gregory, the way we worked it is Gregory would turn over pages every like 10 pages. He would turn it over. So he wrote 10 pages. He gave it to me and Andrew. And we looked at it and we went, yeah, okay. Turn over the next 10 pages. And Andrew said, this is a disaster. and I said, well, it's not a disaster, Andrew. You're overstating it, I think. It needs, it needs to go, slightly different here and there. But, I can do that. And he said, what do you mean you can do that? I said, well, I can rewrite some of the things that Gregory's handling, but at least he's moving the thing along, right?
Moving forward.
Yeah, he was moving, he was writing. And so Andrew was kind of appalled that I was, volunteering to do this. And so I started to do it. And every time Gregory would turn in pages, I would rewrite them. But by about page 50, Gregory was going in one direction, we're going completely differently. So the next 40 pages weren't going to really matter. But at this point, we were like so far in, we couldn't tell him, hey, Gregory, we're taking it in a whole different place. So, when Gregory turned in the last page, like page 95, we were like, and then when Gregory saw it, he was a little appalled, rightfully so. But I think for Gregory's, he went along with it eventually, and he said, all right, well, this is the movie, I guess. And then by that point, Andrew already had gotten the money. Roberta was the producer. Andrew's job was to keep the executive producers away from us. Roberta hired Ben Gruberg, who was the line producer. And we had like a little team going.
Amos, would it be fair, like, could you explain, like, if you were making these Super 8 films showing at Millennium, your goal is to model up this script for what seems to be clearly a feature-length movie you were gonna make.
Mhm.
How was your brain thinking as far as how were you gonna model that different than things like Unmade Bed, your other works? How were you going to theaters looking at more conventional film scene? How you could piece something together where it was a little more conventional or not?
No, I'm, I mean, the same films were always inspiring films. Uh, like, I think the film that we were thinking of, at least, we were talking a little bit about, because we kind of wanted to do it in black and white first, and then they said, no fucking way. We need to sell it to television, and they're not going to buy a black and white film. So we had to then make it into color film, which changed it. We thought it was a gritty New York film, done in this location. I thought the location would give you the flavor. You didn't have to overstate it. But once it was in color, then it became like, okay, they want us to make color. We're going to make it so fucking colorful. It's going to make them blind.
It was very, it's very colorful.
Yeah.
No, the color gave it a look. I
Yes.
mean, it was very visual
Yes.
in that sense. And I think it was a real first of films that used that kind of lighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used a lot of gels, a lot of filters. The problem was that we didn't have that many lights. So you couldn't really light enough at night to give you, let's say, a depth of field. In fact, the AC almost got fired the first time we saw dailies, because there was so much that was out of focus. But it was like, so at one point I think he said, the AC said to us, "Hey, do you want his nose in focus or his eyes?" That's how narrow the depth of field was. So I think that it was on one hand problematic, but thank God for Oliver and the whole crew. It was just like, all right, it's gonna be dark.
I just finished watching it again before getting on this call with you guys, and to me it's almost like film noir, but like saturated 80s, like MTV 80s look, and some of the cutting, but it's like film noir. It's like like those moments where it's Death Wish and stuff, those short moments, it's extended in your movie, and it's just like very gritty New York. You're
But
there.
there's like a lot of, I think it drove Graham crazy in the editing room, because there was not a lot of coverage. It was just like, you got to make a cut. Like, how do you make a cut here? Like, hey, you jumped the 180-degree line. What's a 180-degree line? Who the fuck cares? And it was, some of it was all learning, because I'd never worked with a real crew. I remember one day Roberta and Ben came over to me and said, "Okay, tomorrow you're going to interview script supervisors."
Wow.
And I was like, "What the fuck is a script supervisor?"
That's great.
I had no clue.
That's great.
No clue. And at that time, I was friendly with Scorsese, and I called him. I said, "Marty, what's a script supervisor? I got to interview him tomorrow. What the hell's that?" And he said, "Oh, the script supervisor is the greatest thing in the world. It's like, by the time you're on the set, like, you don't even remember the script. They remind you what actually you're supposed to do. They're kind of like your best, your best friend."
Perfect impression.
So, yeah. So I got to find a best friend, and then I called Coppola, and Francis said, "Oh yeah, well, script supervisor, yeah. I mean, they're basically like your wife. They tell you what to do, and then you don't do it."
That's cool.
And I said, "Okay, so best friend and a wife." And we hired Nancy Musser, who was fantastic, because that was a really hard job in that film. Continuity, and is it the right shoulder, or the left shoulder? Who cares? You know, you got two shoulders. Pick one, 50% chance you're right. She's like, no, that's how it works. And you learn, you know, that's how you learn, you know, filmmaking, by making these films. Like, so I would say it's like the first film I made where I was like the director.
And Amos, with the learning curve, how did you work with Roberta? What was that like, working with a producer, an associate producer? What was that like?
Roberta had really the hardest job, because there was this thing called the budget.
Budget.
And
rules.
And so she was between this crazy filmmaker and these money guys who didn't know anything about film either.
That's great.
So like Andrew had told these money guys that the film was going to be under $1 million, but our budget was like 1.15. And we had to like scrap a couple of, you know, we had to scrap like 3 days of shooting or something. There were scenes that were supposed to be in there that are just not there.
That still works. Roberta, what was your challenge with this?
I learned something from Andrew, which was basically, who was experienced. I say, Andrew, we don't have this in the budget. We can't afford. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. After you shoot the film, what are they going to say? You can't finish it? It was, except with an English accent, not a New York accent. But
yeah,
get it in the can. I said, but we're going to have to lie? No, it's not a lie. Not a lie.
It's filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, I found out. That's what they do. That's what you do.
And it became a problem. Like these guys, Michael Rosenblatt and Tom Coleman. I remember, like in the editing room, we were like, you know, our schedule was very compact, and we had to lock picture at a certain point because they had to get to the sound editing. In those days, this is not the Pro Tools and all the stuff now, all this, you know, technology.
Right.
This was like, you know, splitting
you have a
reels.
Team
of sound. They're cutting. They're making like 10 tracks, you know, with like filler and all this stuff. You know, they got rooms full of them, and they're like cutting to the picture. And we're telling them, like, guys, you know, the picture is locked. We got the sound. They didn't understand what that was. So they came into the room, and I'll never forget this. I think it was like Michael Rosenblatt is sitting there, and he goes, no, I want that out. I want that cut. And Ben Gruberg is sitting there with his pencil. I love Ben Gruberg because he was like a pencil and like a little pad, you know, like he everything was like, you know, writing, and he's making notes, and Rosenblatt, like he doesn't like Ben anyway, because Ben is always like telling him like stuff, but he keeps looking at this guy writing stuff. Every time he says, yeah, get rid of that, put, you know, move that over there, you know. And we spent like 3 hours, like really important hours, with this guy. And finally he says he's had it. And he looks at Ben, he goes, what's this guy doing here? What the hell is he writing there? And we go, well, Michael, look, every cut that we're going to make is impacted with all the guys in the other room doing sound editing. So it's going to add all these hours. Ben is putting the estimate of how much more money it's going to cost for each cut that you just gave us. And he goes, what are you talking about? Every cut is money. And he looks at Ben and he says, how much is it going to cost us to make all my cuts? And Ben says, let me see. He goes into his thing, you know, his abacus there. And he goes, $15,846.35. And the guy flips out. He goes, forget it. He walks out, gets on a plane, goes back to Boston.
Great. It's great.
Like, I'm not putting another nickel into this film.
Shows you what a spoiled society we are now, right? With all this technology we have now, things is just basically dirt cheap and free. It's crazy.
It's on one hand, it's crazy, and on one hand, it's really good. I think it's, you know, it's a tool, and it's utilized well. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love the Pro Tools, but the downside is that everybody gets their own cut.
Yeah.
And it becomes this
Yeah.
like power struggle and whatever.
Yeah, I spoke with Graham briefly today. He apologized. He wanted to really be on this call.
Oh man, that would have been great because
He had to go to the airport. But he did mention, and I did, my first job out of film school, I went to Purchase Film School, and
Mhm.
my first gig was at Sound One, and it's now closed. But he told
Right.
me on the phone that this
Right.
whole movie was cut and created at Sound One. Could you tell me a little bit about what that
Yeah.
experience was like?
Yeah, we were at 1619 Broadway.
That's right.
I used to do
And-
ADR and the Foley work. I used to be the guy running around with the
Right.
shoes.
Yeah, you remind me a lot of
Yeah.
Abel Ferrara. You should.
Oh, I
if
love
you,
Abel. I love
Yeah, well,
it.
you are his like son.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
I love him. Yeah, we met many times. Yeah,
Um,
he went to
so
Purchase. Abel went to Purchase.
he went to Purchase and he talks just like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, no, it was we were in that building. That was we mixed it there. Skip Livesay, who's now
It was a great time to be there. Everybody was around. Yeah.
yeah, it was that was like the place, Sound One. So many sound editors started there. Roberta, what was the name of that Israeli guy who owned it? It was so great.
Alicia,
Alicia Birnbaum.
he
Alicia
didn't know.
Birnbaum.
The only guy was Alicia Birnbaum.
Yeah,
He was one
So-
of the partners.
he was one of the partners. He was a great guy, a fantastic guy. He saved my film, Subway Riders.
Wow.
He mixed that actually.
So what about,
So-
so since we're talking about Sound One, what about this soundtrack, working with Nile Rodgers, infamous with working with Madonna?
Oh.
How the hell did you guys
Go
get
on,
your hands on him?
Amos.
Well, the thing was,
He
when-
had Nile Rodgers.
before I was walking down the street one day, and this is after I gave Andrew the treatment, and I saw a friend of mine and he came up to me. He said, "Congratulations!" And I said, "For what?" He goes, "Well, you got a green light on this movie, Alphabet City." I go, "What? It's financed." I go, "Get out of here! What are you talking about? I never heard of that."
That's
He goes,
great.
"Oh yeah, my friend Nile Rodgers got hired to make the music."
Wow.
And I was like, "What?"
Wow.
And I called Andrew right away, and that's how I found out we got the money to make the movie.
Oh,
They'd already hired Nile Rodgers.
is
so-
that the same with the cast? That's how you got this amazing cast? Michael Winston?
No, the cast, that was a whole other,
Okay.
that happened later, and that's a whole other story. But no, Nile Rodgers came on before we even came on.
Wow.
He was brought in with the money, which I don't know how they got to him, but he got paid the most of anybody on the film. And I think I always had a resentment towards him for that. And I never really liked the music initially. I mean, in the last years, the last few times I've seen the movie, I think the music is great. But in the beginning, I thought it was too disco-y for Alphabet City. But I think looking back on it, it's the right soundtrack. But no, Niall is a legend.
Mhm.
Niall is amazing. But the cast was, was difficult. We had
What a
I can't remember-
cast! Jamie Gertz right off of 16 Candles, Michael Snow off.
Oh, it
Lisa
was
Kennedy.
slightly problematic, I have to say. I mean, it wouldn't happen now, but I think we wanted Rosie Perez to play that part, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And they wanted Jamie Gertz instead.
Wow.
Yeah, we
You
had
know, so-
initially I had seen this young actor named Isai Morales,
Oh yeah.
That's right.
and I thought
And-
Isai is
yeah.
the guy for this film, and the executive producers wouldn't go with Isai.
So
They said we
Amos,
need-
you did not have final say on the cast. It was up to the producers, Amos, for a film like this.
They didn't think it would sell. I mean, they're looking at their bottom line. That was all. I think. No,
Yes.
Amos? I
They
mean,
were
that
looking
was-
at their bottom line, but they, the business was changing so much at that point because home video was just coming into play
Interesting.
that they also had like a kind of a racial prejudice, I would say. They were, like
You could
we
say
wanted a more
that.
Hispanic, and they were looking at more like Scorsese, Italian.
Oh, interesting.
But
Or Italian.
because their thing was like people in Middle America don't know the difference between a Puerto Rican and an Italian. They're just dark, and we went like, no. The whole point of Alphabet City is you got to make it like Puerto Rican. You can't make it like it's not Little Italy. It's
Yeah.
not Mean Streets. That was the whole thing. But what happened was, it was partly my fault, was that I convinced Isai that no matter what, we were going to fight for him. Because both Scorsese and Coppola had said, you got to fight for your cast. And Coppola, had fought Paramount Pictures for Godfather. It was like, all right, fight for the cast. The problem was, then I said to the executive producers, all right, I'm going to put Isai on tape, sort of what Coppola did with Brando on Godfather. I'll put him on tape. You'll see how great he is, right? So this is before cell phones and texting and all this stuff, right? So I'd say to Isai, all right, tomorrow at like 6 o'clock, come into the casting place and I'll put you on tape. We'll do a scene. We'll put you on tape. We'll send it to them in LA. They'll love you and we'll get you. Now, this had been a big fight for weeks, and we were like maybe like 2 weeks from shooting or something, maybe 10 days or something. We still don't have the lead.
Oh, wow.
So we were fucked.
Wow.
And what happened was, on the day that Isai was coming in at like 2:30 in the afternoon, I get a call from LA saying, hey, you want Isai? Fine, get it, Isai. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. We just won the battle. But I can't reach Isai to tell him not to come in. So I said, hey, just for the hell of it, let's just put him on tape anyway. We don't have to send it to them. And Isai comes in and he does his scene and he's so bad. He's so bad. I'm just gobsmacked. I'm like sitting there, like my head's spinning. I just convinced these producers to take an actor who's terrible.
Wow.
And I was like scared shitless because like, oh my God, this whole film revolves around this main character. And this guy is like the worst actor I've ever seen. Now, he's not really that bad, but he was just off day and, we did it half-assedly and all this stuff. And so I'm really worried now. So I called up Francis Coppola, but he was on a phone. And Eleanor Coppola, actually, his wife, I'm like, telling her what's going on here. And I need to speak to Francis because I need his advice. Like, what do I do? But he's on the phone. So Eleanor says to me, Amos, Francis just did a film called like Rumblefish or something like that with these young actors. And there's this kid in it. His name is Vincent Spano. And he's really good. Now, the name hit me because he was on the list that the executive producers had okayed.
Great.
And I'm like, oh yeah, where is he? Where he goes, actually, he's in New York. And I'll if you want to come up here. But like, so I went up to their hotel, Sherry Netherland, and I'm there, and Francis is still on the phone. So Eleanor gives me Vic Ramos's number. Actually, no, she calls Vic Ramos. And it's like 10 o'clock at night now. And she calls Vic Ramos. Vic Ramos picks up the phone and she says, I got this filmmaker here, Amos Poe. He's a friend of Francis's. He's making this film. It's shooting in like 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, 10 days. And he's got a problem, with the lead. It's a great role. I think you should talk to him, and he wants to get Vinny in it. So I get on the phone with Vic, and I live downtown, and he says, yeah, I live on 10th Street, 6th Avenue. And I go, oh, great. And I had a copy of the script on me. So I go downtown, I go to his house, I drop off the script. And next day we talked to him. He said, Vincent is in my office here. He's reading the script right now, but I read it last night. I like it a lot. And within like 24 hours, we had a deal. And that's how we got Vince.
And you felt
then
good about that. You felt good about that casting on Vince.
I was desperate. I mean, I was like, yeah, give me somebody, I want to make this film. But what I did like about Vince is that he had this kind of boyish quality of somebody who is like acting beyond his years. And I thought that was good for the character.
That is true.
That is somebody who's a little bit out of his element in a sense. And that, he was like, he wasn't really he was a sweetheart. He was acting a tough guy. And I thought like that facade of toughness would work well with this film.
You're right.
Like, he wasn't like, a make you work type, he wasn't, in that vein. He was really more sweet.
It comes across the relationship with him and Michael Winslow. You can see
Right.
sweetness a lot. That what they had a really good chemistry, those two.
Yes, they did. And Michael Winslow, God bless him, he was so, good on this, he brought a lot of humor, obviously, and a lot of pathos to that character.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And I think that was like one of the richer characters in the supporting cast, so to speak.
So what about Zora Lampert? I mean, you got a house full of people who aren't Italian except for Vinny.
Well, she was the casting director whose name escapes me at the moment. There was a husband and wife team, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I can't think of the name.
She brought up Zora Lampert, and I liked her from those commercials, the Goya Beans commercials.
Yeah, no.
There she is right there. Let's scare Jessica to death.
Yeah.
So
I didn't actually, when I looked, I didn't really know how much work she had done. And I looked at her resume and I went, holy, she's a real actress. She's like a bona fide New York actress. So since she only really had one scene, I thought it was important to anchor that scene with, somebody who had like, sort of theatrical chops, because it's an indoor theatrical set.
You guys built that set, by the way? That's a question I had. Was that you found apartments?
No, that was Roberta's kitchen. That was Roberta's apartment.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we built that set.
Here's my hope.
What about the car? What's up with that? The whole budget must have went to the car. How'd you get that car?
The Trans Am?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, there's some guy in Wisconsin who calls me once a year, like, hey, could you find that car for me? I want to find it. He owns 6 Trans Ams. Yeah, no, that car, we got it. It was like a pace car or something for the Trans Am. And yeah, it was, and the stunt guy ruined that car for a few days because he did the skid and he had an accident. He hit a fire hydrant.
Oh wow!
And we could only shoot from behind the car because you couldn't shoot from the front because it was like, but they FedEx like a bumper or something and they put it on. But it's a plastic car. It's a fiberglass car, so it's like you hit it the front end, the whole thing starts to shake.
Yeah.
But yeah, we love that car. It was, it was white, so you could see it at night. And the whole thing also, like, we didn't want to, we thought, well, should we do it like, because it all takes place in one night, and should we, one of the conversations we had was, should we have like wet down streets or should we not? And we came up with like, nah, let's not do wet down. That's like too slick. That's like ridiculous. It's gonna be too shiny. But the first night of shooting, it rained like a motherfucker.
It rained.
Wow.
It really
Oh.
poured. Remember that night, Roberta? It was like,
Oh, yeah. That I
And
will
then-
never forget.
so we had like certain shots we could do, which was the opening of the film, really, and then the club scene outdoors, and then, but that meant that for the rest of the film we had to have wet downs. So we had the sanitation truck, or two of them, I think, sometimes, and they would just, you know, hose down
Wetting
the street,
down the streets,
and that's
which made the lighting look quite beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
It
yeah,
reflected in the ground.
yeah. It added more light, added more color.
I mean, this movie's it's heavily gel too. I mean, it's like colored like those paintings in her apartment, you know, it's just.
Yeah, it was really candy colored. We kind of went completely the other direction. It was like, okay, we're not going to just do a little color here. We're going to make it look like Mardi Gras. We're going to make it look
Big.
fun and like a club. And then there was the screens and club area that, you know, where Vinny throws the guy through the screen. That was like, you know, built by Nord Haggerty, who was our production designer, who was great. And then all the clothes, you know, Anna Taylor, who did all the costuming, you know. Yeah, it was a great team effort, you know, because we had a pretty, you know, we didn't shoot, I think it was 18, 19 days, something like that. And we, you know, our crew was the biggest crew I ever worked with, for sure, but it wasn't, you know, a huge crew. And, you know, I think we had like 3 HMIs or something. It was like, it was not a lot of lights, and we had to move fast. I mean, remember that guy, Aaron Barsky, the AD?
Yeah, I do.
He was like, you know, like military, you know, he was like, you know,
Pushing it.
pushing it.
Last question about a scene in the film is in the 80s, there's 2 sex scenes that stand out to me. One is Fatal Attraction, and the other one is this movie. The sex scenes, like, it's like nuts. How did you, what made you shoot that like that? It's almost like primal, animalistic. Then you got the 80s starlight filters. It's wild.
Yeah. Well, it was partly because when we were looking for an actress, we tested many different actresses, and Kate was one of the last ones, and she was like, actually flew in from LA to test for it, which was like, you know, odd.
Mhm.
And she was one of the last ones, and the last one actually. And she and Vince hit it off so well. In fact, they started going out that, but you know, it's really hard to shoot like a love scene, sex scene anyway. And the way that bed was in the middle of the room, you know, I said, okay, Oliver, let's just put a round track around it. And then we could go in one direction with a couple of different lenses, zoom in, zoom out, and then we could go in like another direction, and we'll create like a vertiginous feeling for the viewer. And so they get carried away by the visual, because actually, you know, they had a really hard time doing that scene.
Sure.
It was a really hard scene to direct, because they were almost like fighting at that point, you know.
Comes across like that. Wow.
Yeah, so it's really comes down to the editing, you know, Graham's editing on that scene.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was built to be edited in that kind of like,
Percussive. It's very like.
Mm.
So how do you guys feel about the film now, like today? What are your thoughts about it? Like, their sense of pride. I mean, how do you guys feel about this movie?
Roberta?
It's a cult classic. I love, even my students are saying, hey, Alphabet City, they all know it.
That's great.
Well, yeah, I think
I'm amazed. It's really lasted for a long time.
Yeah, I think maybe it'll find a whole new audience. I think that's the whole point now, because that area of New York is so different.
I was going to ask you.
Like, I mean, it's basically like, looking at like, Rossellini's, Germany Year Zero or something like that, where you're like, oh yeah, you go to Berlin now, you look at those same, Berlin is like a thriving, incredible city. You look at that same building or that whole area was like all bombed out. And we were like, in a bombed out area, in a sense.
I'm from the Bronx. I'm used to it was very common. They would torch buildings and torch cars in the 80s. That's what was done for the insurance money. That was the landscape,
Yeah.
And your script sort of is anchored on that kind of this. It's incredible.
You do see a time. There is a time in that film that is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think between the landscape, the burnt out buildings, and even like the fashion in the film, like the hairstyles, the Lippy's wrapping and his hat, and, his tracksuit. I mean, I think Anna Taylor did a really good job of like catching the sort of hip hop sense of the street in one way. Also, I think the scene of the bust in the burned out building, I think that's like one of my favorite scenes.
I was just going to say that.
Because that was a really hectic day with a lot of extras, and like it was like, I mean, I was so tired at the end of that day. I'll never forget that. There was like, I was exhausted because and it was also like working with a script supervisor, like, we didn't get 30% of the shots, 40% of the shots, there was a lot more setups. But I had the feeling like, I don't know what we got. I had no idea what we got, but I know we got enough stuff that we can make something from this scene. I have no idea how. And I was hoping that sound and sirens and all this other stuff, people screaming, would weave the whole thing. But also because that shot with the camera that goes from the bottom all the way to the top, I mean, on a hoist, because there was a hole in the floor, like one floor we actually had to cut a hole in. It took so long to get that one shot, but for some reason, you get like obsessed with a shot, and when you realize, oh, that's my whole day right there, getting that one shot. Is that worth it? But there was something about that shot that I thought had to have almost like a metaphysical feeling. All the candles, it's like a church. It's like a, there's a religiosity to this drug den that needs to be risen. So it's like in a church where this, it's a really high ceiling, and you want to give that whole thing. So I'm glad, looking back on it, as you ask, like, you go look at this film from 40 years later, what do you think? Like, I'm glad we got that shot. I mean, the day after, I was like, no, what the fuck did I do? It could have gotten like 30 other shots.
It's so, I gotta tell you, it's so, that scene is so unpolished, and it's so haunting and frightening, because like people, they're nodding out, they're all high. It's almost like it's like a documentary, where a lot of other films like New Jack City, whatever, it's a bit polished. And what you did, and it could be because the lighting as well, that you're struggling to see things in the darkness, and what you do see, it's terrifying. The moment you see with the candles is actually terrifying.
That's the thing of like, even like Jaws, it's when you don't see the shark,
Yeah.
then it's scary.
Absolutely.
Like if you see the shark, there he is. But if you don't see him, like you wonder where the hell is that guy? So in those things, we had so much smoke machines. I mean, we were like sick from smoke machines, I think, right, Roberta? Wasn't it like people were coughing? It was getting cold. It was like this time of the year. You know, it was like it was getting really cold. Like by 6 o'clock in the morning, your ass was frozen. You were out there all night, you know, sweating and you know. But by the time it was time to wrap, like and we had to wrap when the sun came up. I mean, it was like that's it. There was no like, oh, well, we can grab another shot. It was like, how? There was one time where we got this thing in a car, I think between Wani and Chunga, and we had to get another close up, but the sun was coming up, so we had to like black everything around because it was. And I think there was even like one shot that was really good, but you saw blue sky or something, and you're like, oh man. Nowadays you could read. You know,
just cut it,
cut around it, or even color timing, color correct it, but not in those days.
So what was the release? How did you guys release this film? What was opening night? Where was it? It wasn't at Millennium. What was opening night like?
Opening night, I as I recall, it opened in 3 theaters, I think, in New York.
In Manhattan, in New York, okay.
Yeah, I think it opened 3 or 4 theaters. It opened in like 800 theaters.
Did you go to one of those 3 theaters?
Yeah, I went to the one in it was a theater that no longer exists called the 8th Street Playhouse.
Right.
Which is like, between 6th Avenue and 5th Avenue.
Just
Or I think or around University. It played like on 42nd Street.
I have a photograph of the marquee.
Mm-hmm.
Please send that to me, Roberta. You got to send that to me. Send me a picture.
Yeah, no, I will do that of the marquee with Alphabet City. But I just don't remember which theater. I guess I could tell by looking at it.
No, the thing
But I absolutely have a picture.
The thing was that they didn't really like the film. The executive producers. They wanted to release Valley Girl or something.
Oh wow.
And what happened was I had a friend at the time named Leon Falk, who worked for CBS Fox Home Video. And Leon kept saying,
that's right.
I'm working for this new company and we're looking to buy product for home video, for VHS. And I heard you're making this film. I gotta see it. I'm gonna buy it for my company. I go, and basically the one thing that Andrew, Tom, and Michael agree on, nobody can see this film until we're ready, because we got all these plans for it. But you really had the feeling like, nah, these guys got no plan for it. These guys are gonna sit on it. So I called Leon. I said, all right, Leon, look, the film is locked picture, but the sound isn't there yet. So like, come by after everybody leaves. And he came over at like around 11 o'clock at night, and I ran the reels for him, and he really liked it. And the next day he talks to his boss, and his boss says it's really good, and Leon says, oh no, this film is great, it's exactly the kind of film we want to release. And they offered them $1.8 million for the home video rights.
Great.
So yeah, but what happened was, yeah, I thought great, when I heard that, but Tom and Michael and Andrew said to Leon, well, how did you see the film? Nobody's supposed to see this film. And Leon said, well, I didn't see it. I just heard about it. He goes, wait, you're gonna toss 1.8 million for a film you heard about? Now get the fuck out of here. When did you see it? And he said, no, I didn't see it really. I just. So they kind of figured out who did it, who was the rat, and they called me out, and they started screaming and yelling at me.
Wow.
And I couldn't take it after a while, and I just said, what the fuck are you guys complaining about? 1.8 million for a film that cost you $1 million? Get the fuck out of here. You should give me like a prize, a reward, like, you can write me a check or something. And they hung up. And they, but in that deal, they had to have what they called in those days, like a medium wide release. So in order to get that check for 1.8 million, they had to put up probably about 300, 400,000 in prints and advertising. That's why it was released that wide. Because I had no idea it was released that wide until recently, when somebody else was telling me, your film played everywhere, but only for 1 week, because that was part of the deal.
Right.
But then, funnily enough, the one country it was sold to a couple countries. 2 countries that it became like a hit film were in Italy, and it, Vince was like, became like a kind of a star in Italy, and that's why he moved to Italy and made films there. It was sort of like a Clint Eastwood thing. And the other country was Germany. But the funny thing was, I was invited to Germany for something else, and I was walking with a friend one evening, and there was a theater showing Alphabet City, and I was like, holy shit. And yeah, it's got German subtitles. I was like, oh man, I gotta see it. And it wasn't in subtitles, it was dubbed. So you had like, Kate Vernon and Vincent Spano like talking in German.
Wow.
But we came in like 15 minutes before the end, or 10 minutes before the end. And the weirdest thing was that at the end of the movie, as soon as the movie ends, they put up a card on the print that said in German, Johnny was captured by the authorities and went to prison. His wife also went to prison, and the child was put up for adoption.
That's great. They recut your movie.
No, well, there's a law. There was a law in Germany at the time that criminals couldn't get away with a crime. So since they were drug dealers, they had to be caught. So it had to be an end credit, an end title card. And I was like, oh my God, they totally missed the whole point. How could they do that? And my friend said, listen, everybody in Germany knows those cards at the end are like so stupid. Like they just laugh. I go, yeah, but it takes away from the whole thing.
I have a question. I was in the punk scene. I was a musician before making movies, and experience I had is I was at a club and I played with the Green Day. Were playing after my band, and as I go outside, there's the singer Billy Joe standing outside, very depressed, smoking a cigarette. I was like, "What's wrong? I mean, you kicked ass tonight." He was very upset because he was going to sign a record deal the following week. And I said, "This is great. This is great news." He goes, "No, Joey, I have a feeling we're gonna lose our fan base. I have a feeling they're gonna turn on me. They're gonna turn on us." And exactly that. There's a magazine called Maximum Rock and Roll, and right when they signed to major label, they were called Greed Day on the underground, the punk scene. Did you experience any kind of retaliation or any kind of anger from the experimental underground community when you went and did this Alphabet City? Did you have some people saying, "Oh man, you're trying to sell out, you're trying to do a Hollywood movie"? Did you have anything like that? Any experiences like that?
That's a good question. Think about that. It's possible, but I, at that time, was so ambitious, and I kind of thought I was making Hollywood movies all along anyway. It was just I was making them in a different way. I thought my Super 8 movies were Hollywood movies. I mean, I had a like distorted, if you're distorted already, the distortion is just part of the whole, thing.
Yeah.
But No, I mean, I think that, yeah, that probably some people did. I think some people might have wanted that, probably not that many. But but I think what was happening around then anyway was that the whole New York sort of underground thing was in a ferment, and whether you were going to continue making the films that you were making before, or just like punk, it was your audience was broadening, so your whole vision had to broaden along with it. But I mean, it was never, the delusion was never that I was making a movie for the mass audience per se, but I did think that the audience that was like-minded was definitely there.
Yeah. When we first spoke, you literally told me, Joey, this is a punk movie. That's what you said.
Yeah, no, I think of that as that. I mean, I think it's kind of like, look, we filmed that movie in the last several months when you could film that movie like that.
Yeah.
Because right after that, January, February 1984 is when Operation Pressure Point happened, and the whole gentrification really started, and things got really cleaned up. We had like one stunt scene, where we had this guy come over and said, "Oh, you don't need a stunt man for that. Yeah, I jumped between those two buildings a million times. So I'll do it for you. Give me $20."
Wow.
And you give him $20 and he was off to the races, and you never see him again. And that's what happened. But yeah, no, this was like in real time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't like, like building a set or using it as a prop, as a background. This was like in it.
So here
I mean, I don't think you could get away with that now because
Yeah.
there's safety requirements. I mean, we had a lot of safety precautions, and the AD, Aaron Barsky, was really into that. But we also, were pretty much, run and gun. Not as much as like my earlier films, which were done without permits and all that stuff. But this is much more professional.
Don't let Alec Baldwin's lawyers hear this interview, huh?
No, that's a tragedy in it, in its own sense. But yeah, because we, I mean, that shootout in the elevator, there was a lot of gunplay there.
Yeah.
A lot of squibs, a lot of weird stuff. That motorcycle were coming through the door. It was like a nightmare.
Is that sugar glass? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Or like lighting that building on fire when Wani and Chunga have that fight in front of it. I mean, we had stunt guys to do that fight, and they were terrible.
Yeah, but when he was in there, when the door was locked, I was actually kind of scared. The fire, he was right by that fire. That's not CGI. How did you, I mean, that was really
we had a good fire guy. We had a good, right, Roberta? We had a really good fire guy.
Amazing.
They controlled it with like jets, gas jets and stuff like that. But we were like, it was a real building there.
Yeah.
So we had to get the camera angles in a way that made it look bigger than it was, but normal stuff. But for me then, and probably for Roberta, and this was like, we'd never done anything like this. This is not, this is not Michael Snow. This is not,
that's great.
Stan Brakhage stuff.
That's great. That's great.
This is like, you basically had these sort of, filmmakers who came from underground or experimental films or more, heady, films to making like this street drama. But, we did the best we could.
So here we are 40 years later, the movie's out, and the great news is you guys have kept a relationship going, and you don't let the cat out of the bag, whatever move, but it looks like you guys are possibly going to be collaborating on another project, correct?
Knock on wood. Knock
That's
on wood.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
that would be great. That would be great. Get that team together. Oliver, Roberta, those of us who are still alive to tell the tale. Yeah.
Well, like I told you on the phone, if you guys need an extra, I'm always available. I can jump over a building for $20. I'll do it.
There you go. There you go. That's the spirit.
Roberta, anything you want to
Thank
add?
you.
Anything you want to add?
Not really. Love the film. Love working with Amos. And we
Likewise.
learned a lot then. Let's see what we can do now. Bring our years of experience to the table.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. I do have one more question for you, Amos. Amos, do you work at all with Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere at home? Are you dabbling with this new software?
No, I still want to cut on a Steam Deck, but I mean I really love that technology though, I must say, but I don't do it myself. I need somebody to work with. What I find, because I have such a Luddite brain, and even back then, but now even more so, I can't deal with the technology and look at the picture and see what the pieces of the mosaic of the jigsaw puzzle are. I either have to be in that or in that, and I definitely a long time ago chose to be in the picture rather than in the. But I've worked with interesting editors, and I have this one guy I work with a lot, who works on Premiere. I loved Final Cut until they kind of destroyed it. And I love Pro Tools. I love the idea of being able to see sound, that it's pictorial, that I get to see all the things and that you can replicate and do all this stuff. Because that was my dream back in the old days of analog. And when that came along, I went, oh my God, that's just what I imagined. So no, I'm totally into that. But
you're still in New York City, Amos, yes?
Yeah.
So Alphabet City's kind of doesn't look the same as in your film. CBGB's is gone. It must, wow, right?
Johnny Barbados, yeah.
Different.
Yeah, but that's the good news about New York. It's always changing.
Flux, yeah.
It's always changing. I mean, it's got so much. That's why it's a motion picture city.
That's great.
Because it's, it's always changing. It's always in motion. It's always something. There's always like some tensions going on. Like there are other cities that are also probably, but not in the same mindset. So Paris I think, is a movie city as well, but it's a sort of a different scale, a different pace. This is the monster, this city. This is the beast.
Guys,
now, I'm sure people
in
Rio think that too, by the way.
Yeah, and in Detroit, she's headed to Detroit.
Detroit, yeah.
Amos, say one last thing about your movie. Say one last thing before we go. Tell some people something about your movie. Come on.
Just go see it. Go see it and you tell me what you think.
That's perfect. God bless you guys. Have a nice night.
Thank you, Joey.
Take
care.
care. Be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye, Roberta.
Bye.